Welcome to the Sleep Chronicles channel. In this video, we'll be talking about how people in Europe survived the harsh winters of the 1900s. Before we begin, you can help these kinds of stories reach a wider audience by subscribing to our channel and liking the video. Enjoy listening. When the snow began to fall slowly, no one knew it would last for weeks. First, it spread like a thin blanket over the roofs. Then it silently covered the pavements. Then it made the roads, railways, ports, and fields invisible. In the early 1900s, winter was more than just cold. Winter was the shortening of the days. It was the ice crystals hitting the windows. It was the long evenings spent by the stove. It was the growing weight of the coal sacks. It was the lengthening bread lines. In the cities, people would wake up to find the streetlights still on. Horse-drawn carriages would move slowly through the snow. Trams would be delayed, and train whistles would disappear into the fog. At the port, the cargo cranes would fall silent with frozen ropes. In the countryside, the wind was harsher. It seeped between the wooden houses, howled through the roofs, and entered through the cracks in the doors. People would slowly emerge from under their blankets in the mornings. They warmed their hands with their breath, then cleaned the ashes before lighting the wood-burning stove. No one spoke of major disasters. This wasn't a war. It wasn't a plague, but winter set its own rules, and everyone had to obey them. Evenings came early. Even in the afternoon, the sun hung low, casting a pale color on the streets. Shops quickly lowered their shutters, yellow light seeping through the windows. People wrapped their scarves a little tighter around themselves, walking home slowly but surely. There was another world inside the houses. The coal crackled in the stoves, pots simmered slowly. Wet boots were left to dry by the door. Thick coats were hung on chairs. Some read old newspapers at the table. Some watched the ice on the window pane while stirring their soup. Children got under the blankets earlier. Adults would talk about the next day's weather, that they didn't make many plans, because everyone knew the night would be long. The wind wouldn't die down. It could snow until morning. And that's exactly why. This video is a slow window into those long nights. Now imagine you're sitting by the stove. The snow is silently accumulating outside. The wind is swirling around the roof. Just listen. Let everything else slowly fade away. Snow began to fall silently on the city with the first light of dawn. At first, it was just a thin blanket. It lightly covered the cobblestones and the tracks of horse-drawn carriages. But within a few hours, the streets, squares, and harbors became invisible. The habits of daily life suddenly slowed down. When people woke up in the mornings and opened their windows, they watched the patterns the snowflakes formed on the glass, using their breath to melt the ice. In the houses, coal stoves slowly warmed up, and soup and water began to boil in the pots. Hands wrapped in blankets shivered quickly as they sought warmth, and little children murmured quietly under their blankets. In the city centers, trams were delayed, and horse-drawn carriages struggled to move through the snow. The marketplaces fell silent. Stall owners removed their gloves, rubbed their hands, and slowly unpacked their goods. As smoke from factory chimneys swirled in the wind, workers tried to make their way to work with heavy steps on the snow-covered sidewalks. Some people's breath would turn to ice in the freezing cold as they carried sacks of coal. And every morning in the silence outside, the wind would howl across the roofs, swirling between the old stone houses. In the countryside, the situation was even more difficult. Wooden houses shivered in the wind, and snowflakes dripped from the roofs onto the windows. In the mornings, people would slowly emerge from their blankets, clear the ashes to light the stove, and awaken the fire. Animals in the barns would turn their breath to ice, making soft sounds in the silence of the morning. Children would wake shivering, humming songs softly as their mothers put them in warm water. Baking bread and preparing breakfast created a silent rhythm against the icy silence outside. Every creak of a door, every footstep, every wisp of smoke from the stove was a sign of life in this cold world. Throughout the day, the wind and snow tied people to their homes, silenced the streets, and everyone's only concern was survival. Sometimes people would gather round the stove and tell each other stories, but more often they would be lost in their own thoughts in silence, watching the snow fall slowly. And this silence was a window into the long winter nights, both making people think and slowing them down. As afternoon approached, the sun cast its faint light upon the snow, and the streetlights shone brighter. Light filtering through the windows cast gentle shadows on the wooden floors and snow-covered roofs. People inside the houses sat by the windows with warm drinks, watching the silence outside. Some read newspapers, others played quiet games with the children. Every movement was slow and careful, for the echoes of footsteps reverberated across the snow. In the countryside, people took short walks to gather wood and coal, supporting each other against the chill of the wind. The birds and animals in the village square fell silent, as if lost beneath the snow. Only snow-covered footprints remained on the streets, a reminder of the passing hours. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the houses, creating a dull silence on the horizon. Children napped, while adults sat around the stove, mentally planning for tomorrow. As evening approached, the sky turned a deep blue, and the moonlight seemed like a bright blanket over the snow. People returned to their homes, the streets became deserted, trams and cars slowed, and the city fell silent. The warmth of the stove created a small haven of safety in the darkness. Looking out the window, people watched the snow fall slowly. Their breathing slowed, and they silently released all the weariness of the day. At this very moment, the snow, the wind, and the silence of the night merged. The days once filled with the hardships of life slowly faded away, and a peaceful winter evening prevailed. This symbolized only the beginning of the long days that people spent in a calm and quiet rhythm to survive in the cold winters of early 1900s Europe. As the day progressed, the silent blanket of snow completely enveloped the towns and villages. The smoke rising from the chimneys of the small village houses gently ascended in the cold air, soon disappearing into the mist. The stone fountains in the village square were frozen, covered with a thin layer of ice. People wrapped their thick coats tightly around themselves when going outside, and doubled their scarves and gloves. The sound of each footstep echoed on the snow, and the snowflakes falling from the sky merged with the shadows under the streetlights, creating a silent film. The interiors of the houses, however, were quite different. Families gathered around the stove in the small rooms. Mothers and fathers whispered softly as they tucked their children under the blankets, ensuring they fell asleep peacefully. The warmth of the stove slowly spread to the corners of the room, the wooden walls absorbing this warmth. Bags of coal stood silently in a corner of the room, waiting to be used when needed. The steam from the simmering soups in the pots slowly filled the room, creating a world entirely separate from the cold and silence outside. The streets were quiet, but not empty. Some people walked their dogs, letting them roam the snow-covered paths, their light breaths turning to ice in the air. Horse-drawn carts slowly made their way along the stone streets, their tire tracks disappearing onto the snow shortly afterward. Smoke billowed from factory chimneys, carried by the wind, as workers and villagers continued their rituals of survival against the snow and cold outside. Every morning, the snow-covered paths were full of tracks left over from the night, which a small child or adult could slowly alter with their walk. Later in the day, the wind began to blow harder, snowflakes slowly swirling in the air before falling to the ground. Some villagers went outside to prepare firewood and coal. The sharpness of the wind struck their faces, their hands and noses quick freezing. The light from the houses blended with the shadows on the snow, creating what seemed like a small island of warmth. These tiny lights contrasted with the frozen silence outside, making the night a little more bearable. As the first darkness of evening falls, both cities and villages fall completely silent. The yellow light filtering through the windows blends with the blue snow outside, creating a peaceful contrast. As people retreat into their homes, their steps slow. The cold and snow outside accept the silence. Families gather around the stove, shaking off the day's weariness. Children breathe peacefully under their blankets. Pots continue to simmer in the corners of houses, the warm air from the stoves filling the rooms. Looking out the window, one can observe the gentle falling of the snow and the soft rustling of the wind. The passage of horse-drawn carriages is now rare. The streets are deserted, and the silence is almost palpable. In the villages, animals wait patiently in their barns. Their breath turns to ice in the air, while outside only the sound of the wind and snow remains. As the night progresses, candlelight flickers in some houses. Shadows begin to dance on the walls. Children are in deep sleep. Adults drift off lightly beside the stove. Each house silently continues its survival habits in its own small, warm world. The snow outside completely envelops the night. Streetlights gently illuminate this silent white blanket. At this moment, the tranquility surrounding the people and the gentle falling snow reflect the true spirit of early 1900s European winters. Every breath, every step, every light and shadow, all a part of the long winter nights of survival and of silence. The viewer, merging with this quiet rhythm, slows their breath, leaving behind the stress of the day, and slowly immerses themselves in the story of the people who live under the snow through long, cold nights. In the middle of winter, the snow had ceased to be merely a blanket, creating a complete silence that enveloped everything. The village roads were covered with a white flat blanket, and the tracks of horse-drawn carts and people walking quickly disappeared. The wind gently brushed against the edges of the windows, slowly sliding the accumulated snow off the roofs. When people went outside, they tightly wrapped their thick coats and scarves around themselves, constantly checking their gloves. The snow under their feet made a slight sound with each step, and their breath turned to ice in the cold air. Inside the houses, however, life continued at a completely different pace. The warmth of the stove enveloped the rooms, and the steam rising from the pots boiling on the hearth slowly mingled with the air. While the children slept under blankets, the adults sat quietly around the stove, thinking about the day's work and the day's plans. The wooden walls and stone floors trapped the heat, spreading it to the corners of the house and making the inside forget the cold. Looking out the windows, the snow-covered roofs and the soft light of the streetlights combined to draw viewers into the village. The villagers helped each other by taking short walks to prepare firewood and charcoal. The horses waited patiently in the stables, their breath turning to ice in the air, creating a silent wait in the darkness. The smoke rising from each chimney merged in the distance, forming small islands of light on the horizon. The slow falling snow, the gentle hum of the wind, and the warmth emanating from the rooms defined the silent rhythm of the long winter days. And this rhythm silently demonstrated both the struggle for survival and the slowing down of time. As evening darkness fell, villages and towns were enveloped in a silent white blanket. The yellow light filtering through the windows blended with the blue and grey snowscape outside, creating a calm and peaceful contrast. People retreated to their homes. The streets emptied, leaving only the gentle murmur of snow and wind. Families gathered around the stove, silently shedding the day's weariness. Children slept soundly under blankets, while adults quietly contemplated and rested. Pots simmering in the corners of houses, steam rising from the stove, and gentle play of light contrasted with the snow and silence outside. Wooden floors and stone walls absorbed the warmth of the stove, creating a safe and peaceful atmosphere inside. Small pets waited quietly in the barns, their breath turning to ice, making the difference between the cold world outside and the warmth of the house noticeable. The viewer looking out the window felt the slow falling snow and the howling wind, and all the weariness of the day slowly faded away. And at this very moment, after a long and harsh winter day, silence, warmth, and snow merge, the tranquil rhythm that people created to survive in the European villages and cities of the early 1900s slowly draws the viewer in. Every breath, every step, every steam from the stove and snowflakes create an experience that is both historical and sleep-friendly. The viewer is completely immersed in a silent and long winter day, and all the noise of the day, the chaos of modern life is forgotten. By midday, the snow was still falling incessantly. The streets, village squares, and town roads were completely covered in a white blanket. The tracks of horse-drawn carriages and pedestrians soon disappeared, each step breaking the silence, and then suddenly receding. Little children looked out of the windows, watching the snowflakes slowly fall to the ground, pressing their fingertips against the glass. Villagers walked slowly, rubbing their hands together, their breaths briefly turning to ice. Some people had to go outside to carry wood and coal. The cold, wind, and snow seemed to challenge them all at once, striking their faces. Life inside the houses was completely different from the cold and silence outside. The warmth of the stove filled the rooms, mingling with the soups boiling in the pots and the steam from the water, the wooden walls and stone floors absorbing this heat. The women worked silently in the kitchen, preparing soup, checking the bread, every movement slow and careful. The men checked the wood and coal stocks, carrying supplies on short walks when necessary. In the barns, the animals waited silently, their breaths turning to ice in the air, contrasting with the snow and wind outside. The yellow light filtering through the windows of the houses blended with the blue snowscape outside, creating a tranquil atmosphere. In some houses, quiet conversations would begin by the stove. Stories were told, old times were reminisced about, and children would listen in whispers. The howling of the wind and the gentle crackling of the snow outside made the warm and silent rhythm inside even more precious. Every step, every breath, the sound of every pot boiling formed the silent rhythm of these long and harsh winter days. The villagers had learned to live patiently, cautiously, and closely together during these days. Every action was part of survival. As evening darkness began to fall, the streets and villages were completely covered in a silent white blanket. The yellow and orange light filtering through the windows blended with the blue snow outside, creating a calm and peaceful contrast. People retreated into their homes, the streets emptied, leaving only the sound of snow and the wind outside. Families sitting around the stove left behind the day's weariness, while the children slept soundly under blankets. The adults quietly contemplated and planned the day's tasks. Soups simmering in the corners of houses, steam rising from the stove, and gentle play of light added rhythm to the rooms. Wooden floors and stone walls absorbed the warmth emanating from the stove, creating a safe and peaceful atmosphere inside. Domestic animals waited quietly in the barns, their breath turning to ice in the air, while the sound of snow and wind outside could be heard as a faint hum in the distance. Looking out of some windows, the slow falling snow, the gentle sound of the wind, and the faint light of the street lamps combined to offer the viewer a peaceful winter evening. The smoke rising from each chimney would converge on the horizon, forming small islands of light. Neighbors would exchange brief waves, smile slightly, but everyone would return to their own warm homes. And this silence captures the true rhythm of early 1900s European winters. Every breath, every step, every steam from the stove and the snowflakes create an experience that is both historical and sleep-friendly. The viewer is completely immersed in a long, silent winter day. The complexities of modern life fade away, and they drift towards peaceful sleep. Europe in the early 1900s struggled not only with harsh winters, but also with challenges that varied from region to region. In the northern villages of Germany, long snowstorms covered farmlands, forcing villagers to reach fields with horses and oxen. Houses were built with a mixture of stone and wood, with thick roofs designed to bear the weight of the snow. Ovens, emitting light smoke in the village center, were vital for providing bread and soup. In northern Italy, roads in mountain villages were blocked by snow and ice, forcing people to undertake long and dangerous treks to carry their most basic supplies. In rural France, in villages attached to small towns, snow-covered roads and icy rivers hindered transportation. Villagers kept their animals in barns while engaging in quiet conversations with their families around the stove. Winter days were short and nights long and silent. During this time, people devoted themselves to household chores and preparations, honing their survival skills against the cold. In Eastern Europe, particularly in villages around Poland and the Czech Republic, heavy snow and strong winds could close roads for months, delaying the arrival of supplies from the outside world. Here, communities lived more closely together, forming small support groups, and mutual assistance between neighbors became vital. Throughout winter, snow and cold were not only a physical obstacle, but also a teacher, testing people's patience and resilience. In Western Europe, in villages in England and the Netherlands, fog and snow combined, and in the mornings, streetlights dimly lit as people quietly went to their work and fields. Young children looked out the window, following the tracks of horses and wagons. The silence outside contrasted with the warmth inside. Each region faced different challenges, but a common rhythm: cold, silence, survival, and interconnected living. As evening fell, the sound of the wind grew sharper in the Austrian alpine villages. Mountain roads were covered with snow and ice, forcing villagers to tread heavily as they left their homes. The layer of snow on the roofs of houses melted slightly with the smoke from the stoves, dripping silently throughout the night. Inside the wooden houses, however, the air was warm and safe. Families gathered around the stove, shaking off the day's fatigue, and children slept under blankets. In Northern Europe, in the villages of Norway and Sweden, the long nights, intertwined with snowstorms, had bound people even closer together. Fishermen and farmers had to help each other within the community to survive. Sharing food and fuel was the most basic ritual of life in the cold. Small roads and frozen rivers functioned as silent arteries connecting the villages. Only locals and horses could pass through. In Western Europe, particularly in the rural areas of France, villages were covered in long stretches of snow. The warm light filtering through the windows of the stone houses provided a subtle contrast to the snow-covered streets. The villagers would tell stories around the stove, share memories of old winters, and encourage each other during these long nights. Inside, the children slept, while the adults patiently and silently prepared for the next day. And so, in every corner of Europe, the harsh winters both challenged and bound people together. Every snowflake, every breath, every steam rising from the stove slowly drew the viewer into the silent and cold, yet vibrant rhythm of that era. These long and silent winters of the early 1900s tested people's patience, resilience, and survival skills anew every day. The viewer, along with this silent rhythm, slowly slowed their breathing, forgetting all the noise and chaos of the day. In Europe at the beginning of the 1900s, winter showed a different face in every region. In the northern villages of Italy, at the foot of the Alps, snow covered the village roads, making transportation almost impossible. The snow accumulating on the roofs of the small stone houses stood as a heavy burden, slowly pressing down on the wooden supports. As the villagers carried their carts and supplies, their breath turned to ice, their hands clenched with endurance despite the cold. The women constantly checked the stoves to keep the houses warm, preparing meals slowly but carefully. The children slept quietly under their blankets, looking out the window to watch the falling snowflakes. These silent observations strengthened their patience and attentiveness. In the rural villages of Germany, heavy snowstorms and short daylight hours made life even more difficult. In small towns, markets rarely opened, and villagers helped each other by sharing their food and fuel supplies. The breath of horses and oxen turned to ice in the air, leaving a faint crackling sound on the snow-covered roads. Inside the houses, a warm rhythm filled the air. The warmth emanating from the stove spread slowly between the wooden floors and stone walls, creating a quiet sense of security. In Eastern Europe, Polish and Czech villages were surrounded by harsh winds and thick layers of snow. Communities lived more closely together, and mutual assistance between neighbors took on a vital rhythm. People would silently offer each other encouragement with short words as they carried necessary supplies on long walks. The harshness of winter was not only a physical obstacle, but also a teacher that tested people's patience and resilience. In the rural areas of Western Europe, especially in the small towns of France and the Netherlands, winter nights were filled with silence. The warm light filtering through the windows of stone and wooden houses created a subtle contrast with the snow-covered streets. Villagers retreated into their homes, children sleeping quietly under blankets while adults silently contemplated the day by the stove. Small pets waited silently in the barns, their breath turning to ice in the air, the sound of snow and wind outside becoming a distant hum. In the northern regions of England, fog and snow merged, making the streets almost invisible. Villagers treaded cautiously with their horses and carts, their breaths briefly turning to ice. In the houses, silence reigned. Stories were told by the stove, old winter memories were shared, and neighbors exchanged short waves to cheer each other up. Because the days were short and the nights long and silent, people had built the rhythm of winter on silence and patience. In Eastern Europe, in the mountain villages around Poland and the Czech Republic, a howling wind and snowstorms would completely block the roads. Villagers worked together with their neighbors, carrying necessary supplies and organizing the sharing of food and fuel. Winter was both a physical barrier and a community test. People had to depend on each other to survive. And so, in different villages and towns across Europe, the harsh winter both challenged and bound people together. Every breath, every step, and every steam rising from the stove draws the viewer into the rhythm of a silent, long winter day. These cold and silent European winters of the early 1900s offered both a historical experience and a sleep-friendly journey. In the early 1900s, Europe's harsh winters presented both a physical and social challenge. In the northern villages of Norway, snow would fall continuously for weeks, completely blocking roads. Fishermen had to transport their supplies across frozen fjords and snow-covered harbor routes. Their breath would turn to ice, their hands clenched with resilience despite the cold. In the houses, the warmth of the stove would slowly spread between the wooden walls and stone floors, creating a quiet sense of security. Women worked quietly in the kitchen, preparing bread and soup, each movement requiring attention and patience. Children, looking out the window and watching the snowflakes fall, learned a calm patience. In the Bavarian towns of southern Germany, snowstorms and short days had made the villages more close-knit. Barn doors were sealed with snow, animals huddled together for protection, and people helped each other organize food and fuel supplies. Because the daylight hours were short, everyone acted patiently and cautiously. Every step and every breath was part of the struggle for survival. In Eastern Europe, particularly in rural Poland and Hungary, snowstorms would close roads for months, making it difficult to connect towns and villages. Communities became more tightly bound together, and mutual aid took on a vital rhythm. Children peered out of small windows, watching the silent dance of the snow, while adults planned preparations for the coming day. In the rural villages of France, harsh winter evenings were balanced by the warmth and silence inside the stone houses. Families sitting around the stove would leave behind the day's weariness, children would sleep peacefully under blankets, and adults would reflect on the day's events. The howling of snow and wind outside made the silence inside even more precious. In the northern English countryside, fog and snow would merge, making the streets almost invisible. Villagers would walk carefully with their horses and carts, their breath briefly turning to ice. The interiors of the houses, however, were filled with a warm rhythm. The light and steam emanating from the stove created a calm and peaceful atmosphere. In Norway and Sweden, communities lived in close proximity to each other against snowstorms. Sharing food and fuel had become the most fundamental rhythm of survival. The harshness of winter tested people's patience and resilience anew each day, creating a silent but powerful community spirit. And so, in different villages and towns across Europe, the winters of the early 1900s both challenged and united people. Every snowflake, every breath, every wisp of steam from a stove slowly drew the viewer into the silent, long winter days of that era. In the early 1900s, winter in the high mountain villages of Austria taught people lessons in patience. It was filled with cold and silence. Snow fell incessantly for weeks. Roads were completely blocked, and small horse-drawn carts and pedestrians could only move with great effort. The snow accumulating on the roofs of houses created a heavy load on the wooden supports, potentially damaging the roofs if not handled carefully. Villagers' breath turned to ice as they went outside with wood and supplies. Despite the cold, they held on tightly. Inside, the warm air from stoves and ovens filled every corner of the house. Children slept peacefully under blankets while adults quietly went about their day's work. In rural Poland, harsh winds and snowstorms made it difficult to connect villages. Communities took care to live together, organizing the sharing of food and fuel. While protecting the animals in the barns, people had to carry necessary loads on long walks. Winter was not only a physical obstacle, but also a teacher that strengthened the interdependence of communities. In northern Italy, mountain villages were covered in a white blanket, the roads filled with ice and snow. The light streaming through the windows of the small stone houses blended with the snowy landscape outside, creating a calm and peaceful scene. Women worked quietly in the kitchens, preparing bread and soup, each movement done carefully and patiently. Children sat by the window, watching the snow fall gently, appreciating the silence outside. In the rural towns of France, as dusk fell, the streets were covered in a silent white blanket. The yellow light filtering through the windows of the stone houses created a soft glow on the snow-covered roads, contrasting with the warmth of the interiors. The villagers retreated to their homes, children sleeping under blankets while adults quietly reviewed the day by the stove. The animals waited in the barns, their breath turning to ice in the air, the sound of the wind and snow outside becoming a faint hum in the distance. In the northern English countryside, fog and snow merged, making the streets almost invisible. The villagers walked cautiously with their horses and carts, their breath briefly turning to ice. The interiors of the houses were warm and safe. The steam and light from the stoves offered a quiet and peaceful rhythm to the household. In Eastern Europe, in the mountain villages around Hungary and the Czech Republic, communities lived close together against snowstorms. Supplies were shared, and food and fuel supplies were carefully organized. The harshness of winter tested both the physical and social resilience of people, fostering a silent but powerful community spirit. And so, in different villages and towns across Europe, these winters of the early 1900s brought both hardship and commitment. Every snowflake, every breath, invited the observer on a silent journey into sleep. In Europe at the beginning of the 1900s, winter wasn't just snow and cold. People had to work actively every day to survive. In Polish villages, women and children would go into the forest to gather firewood along the frozen paths. Their hands would be red from the cold, their breath turning to ice. Animals were kept in the barns, and villagers guided horses and oxen patiently through the snow-covered paths. In front of the small stone houses, children played in the snow, but also prepared to help their families. The inside of the houses was warm, but the outside was freezing. The warm steam from the stove spread to every corner of the house, both protecting and comforting the people. The situation was no different in northern Italy. In the mountain villages, people resisted the heavy burden of the snow, clearing stone and wooden paths, carrying food and firewood. Women baked bread by the stove, prepared soup, and quietly left the day's weariness behind. Men went out into the frozen fields, checked on the animals, and made minor repairs when needed. During the long silent nights of winter, the villagers honed their resilience both physically and mentally. Every snowflake, every breath was like a survival ritual. In the rural villages of France, when snow and storms combined, the bonds between people grew stronger. Villagers helped each other move animals from barns to safe areas. Young children also helped with the moving, both having fun and learning. In the village center, wood piles were piled up, firewood for stoves was collected, and a plan was made to meet everyone's daily needs. In villages in northern England, women and children carried water and firewood along foggy and snow-covered roads, while men supervised horse-drawn carts. The hardships of winter increased solidarity and sharing within the community, creating a strong bond between people. Thus, in different villages across Europe, The winters of the early 1900s were shaped not only by cold and snow, but also by people's steadfastness, patience, and solidarity in life. Every step, every breath, and every effort to carry firewood drew the observer into the atmosphere of a quiet but vibrant winter day, an experience conducive to sleep, yet also full of history and life. In the rural villages of France, when snow and storms combined, the bonds between people grew stronger. Villagers helped each other move animals from barns to safe areas. Young children also helped with the moving, both having fun and learning. In the village center, wood piles were piled up, firewood for stoves was collected, and a plan was made to meet everyone's daily needs. In villages in northern England, women and children carried water and firewood along foggy and snow-covered roads, while men supervised horse-drawn carts. The hardships of winter increased solidarity and sharing within the community, creating a strong bond between people. Thus, in different villages across Europe, the winters of the early 1900s were shaped not only by cold and snow, but also by people's steadfastness, patience, and solidarity in life. Every step, every breath, and every effort to carry firewood drew the observer into the atmosphere of a quiet but vibrant winter day, an experience conducive to sleep, yet also full of history and life. In the mountain villages of northern Italy, on snow and ice-covered slopes, villagers began their daily tasks from early morning. Stables were protected under the weight of the snow, animals were huddled together to protect them from the cold, and food and water were carefully distributed. Women constantly checked the stove to keep their houses warm, prepared bread and soup, and every movement in the kitchen was done meticulously and patiently. Children sat by the window, watching the silent dance of the snow, sometimes helping their families by carrying small branches and pieces of wood. The houses were warm and safe. The steam from the stove slowly drifted between the wooden and stone walls, creating a quiet sense of security and comfort. In the rural towns of France, huge piles of wood were prepared in front of the stone houses, and the streets were marked with lantern lights. Villagers helped each other carry food and fuel, and children carried loads with their small hands, both having fun and learning responsibility. In the evenings, families would sit quietly around the stove, leaving behind the day's weariness, sharing old winter memories, and strengthening the community spirit. The horse-drawn carts and wood piles in the village square added movement to the silence of the snow-covered roads, showing that life went on. In the northern English countryside, fog and snow merged, making the streets almost invisible. The villagers, in their heavy winter clothes, carried the carts and loads of wood, their breaths briefly turning to ice. The men carefully navigated the frozen roads, guiding the animals and controlling the balance of the carts. The women accompanied the children, carried small loads, and supported each other at every step. The interiors of the houses were warm and safe. The light and steam emanating from the stove created a silent but lively rhythm, drawing the viewer into the heart of village life. In Eastern Europe, in the mountain villages around Hungary and the Czech Republic, the harshness of winter was both an obstacle and a binding element for people. Community members worked together, carrying necessary supplies and organizing the sharing of food and fuel. Villagers encouraged each other as they carried wood and water on long walks. Young people and children learned this solidarity and felt the rhythm of the community. Every snowflake, every breath, and every step draws the viewer into a silent but intense winter experience. European villages in the early 1900s offered a connected, vibrant, warm, and history-filled experience despite the challenging weather conditions. And so, the viewer both learns history and prepares to fall asleep with a slow and calm rhythm. The harshness of winter brought with it both the struggle for survival and the sleep-friendly silence. In various villages across Europe, winter arrives not only with snow and cold, but also with unexpected events and minor crises. In Bavaria, Germany, a sudden ice storm one night forced villagers to clear roads and move animals to safe shelters. The doors of barns and winter storage facilities were completely frozen, leaving the animals in distress. Some cows and horses struggled to remain calm under the weight of the snow and the cold. Young men, their breath turning to ice, carefully carried wood and fodder across icy fields and narrow stone paths. Women, meanwhile, prepared hot soup and bread before returning home, offering moral support and physical and mental encouragement to the weary villagers. Young children helped carry small pieces of wood alongside their families, playing snowball fights, falling and getting up again, turning the cold weather into a fun playground. Some worked diligently to clear fallen branches and pieces of snow sliding off roofs along the snow-covered paths. In a village at the foot of the Italian Alps, a strong wind from the mountains quickly turned into a heavy snowstorm. The snow accumulating on the roofs of the stone houses in the village was pressing down on them, and some roofs were beginning to crack, alarming the homeowners. A group of villagers were trying to clear the snow from the roofs with ropes and hooks, while others were moving wood, food, and animal feed to safe places. In the village square, a small group of children were having fun and helping with community work as they carried letters and packages along the snow-covered paths. The elders watched the work from their windows, guiding the young and helping out themselves when necessary. The villagers supported each other, experiencing the rhythm of working together and solidarity, despite the fatigue and harsh weather conditions. The silence of the snow and the howl of the storm created an atmosphere of both defiance and tranquility over the village, offering the viewer a historical and sleep-friendly ambience. In a small town in Poland, snow and fog unexpectedly halted transportation one morning. Bakers organized volunteer groups to transport bread and flour. Some villagers used horse-drawn carts to shorten icy roads. Fishermen on the frozen surface of a small lake were measuring the thickness of the ice as they tried to catch fish. In rural France, townspeople prepared food and firewood for winter nights, while also placing lamps and signs on the streets to protect against snowstorms. Children built small snow huts in front of their houses, playing safely alongside their families. In the northern English countryside, people turned the heavy snowfall into an opportunity, organizing community games and small competitions. Villagers transported supplies in horse-drawn carts, helping each other, creating a rhythm of winter's hardship and solidarity. In every village, The harshness of winter was both a teacher of hardship and a way to strengthen community bonds. And the viewer was drawn into these quiet but vibrant winter days, learning history and slowly preparing for sleep. Winter in the Balkans was harsher than in the northern villages of Europe. The winds were sharper, snow sometimes piled up to several meters high, and roads were often impassable. In small Serbian and Bulgarian villages, villagers would go out at the first light of dawn. Women, wrapped in their thick coats, would climb the slopes to gather wood and prepare firewood, while children accompanied them, carrying small branches and sometimes playing in the snow. The animals in the barns were crammed together and covered with straw and hay to protect them from the cold. Some villagers would stand guard all day to prevent the animals from freezing. Men would carry food and firewood along the frozen paths, helping each other carry heavy loads. In the village square, snow was cleared from the stone paths, small groups organizing to open the roads. This was both a way of survival and a demonstration of community solidarity. In the mountain villages, the situation was even more challenging. Snow-covered slopes, slippery stone paths, and icy rivers tested the villagers' patience and vigilance. Some young men tried to catch fish by checking the thin sheets of ice on the river, while others carried wood and reinforced the animal shelters. The village houses, built with a mixture of stone and wood, were resistant to the weight of the snow accumulating on the roofs. The steam and light from the stoves brought warmth and a sense of security inside. In Balkan villages, especially during the long, dark winter nights, community activities were crucial. Villagers would gather, organize the distribution of firewood and food, and children would help with small tasks. Lanterns burned in the town square and on the stone and snow-covered streets, and guards kept watch to ensure the safety of the roads. Women baked bread by the stove, prepared soup, and provided warmth and energy to the community members. Men guided each other while carrying heavy loads, checking on the safety of the young and children. In some villages, small groups of fishermen would fish in the frozen rivers, carefully venturing onto the ice to provide for the day's needs and carrying food for the community. Balkan winters increased both physical and social resilience, binding villagers more tightly together. Every snowflake, every breath, and every step drew the viewer into a silent but vibrant Balkan winter, offering an atmosphere that was both historical and sleep-friendly. Winter in the Baltic countries arrives with a harshness and silence different from other European villages. In the northern Finnish villages, lakes are completely frozen, and snowdrifts cover houses and roads. Early in the morning, villagers must walk along snow-covered paths to do their daily chores. Women, wrapped in thick fur coats, carry wood to keep the houses warm, light the stoves, and prepare food. Children play by the frozen riverbanks, sometimes helping to carry small fish and firewood. Stables and animal shelters are carefully protected against the freezing weather, reinforced with hay and straw. Men carry food and fuel, traversing icy paths, and bring supplies from frozen fields by horse-drawn carts. In Baltic villages, community solidarity was fundamental to survival. Everyone helped each other, working together through snowstorms to clear paths and protect animal shelters and food. In Estonian villages, during the long winter days, icy rivers were both dangerous and vital for small fishermen. Young men and elderly fishermen measured the thickness of the ice on the frozen lakes, trying to catch fish, and carried necessary supplies to the houses. Children played in the small patches of snow by the side of the roads, contributing to the running of the village. This quiet but lively atmosphere offered the viewer both a historical setting and a sleep-friendly environment in the middle of winter. In the rural villages of Latvia, heavy snow and wind made village roads impassable. Women tended to barns and household chores, while children helped carry firewood and clear snow. Frozen rivers and lakes were both a risk and a means of survival for fishermen. Some young people fished, navigating the thin layers of ice, while others continued to carry wood and food. In the village squares, lanterns shone along the snow-covered stone paths, and villagers stood guard to ensure the safety of the roads. Stables and storerooms were constantly monitored to protect them from the weight of the snow and cold. While men transported goods with horse-drawn carts, women and elders baked bread and prepared soup indoors, preserving the warmth and energy of the villagers. In the Baltic villages, the harshness of winter was both a physical and social teacher. Community members worked together. Children and young people learned the rhythm of survival, and the villages became more closely bound to one another. Snowstorms, icy roads, and long nights draw the viewer into a quiet but intense northern European winter, an ideal atmosphere for both learning about history and preparing for a peaceful sleep. In the northern villages of Norway, winter was a harmony of white silence and harsh winds. Small wooden houses were covered in thick blankets of snow, steam rising from the windows carrying the warmth from inside to the outside. Villagers went out early in the morning, even though the sun appeared only briefly, to feed the animals and carry firewood. Children played small games by the frozen lake, sometimes helping to carry wood along the icy paths. Young fishermen watched each other as they fished in the frozen rivers and lakes, identifying safe routes. As snowstorms engulfed the village, villagers supported each other, clearing paths and moving necessary supplies to safety. In the mountain villages of Sweden, the winds were strong and sharp. Villagers carried supplies along snow-covered paths with horse-drawn carts and sleds, and maintained barns and shelters. Women prepared soup and bread by the stove, helped the children, and provided warmth for the community. Every snowflake, every breath, and every step drew the viewer into the silent but intense winter of Northern Europe. In the heart of the village, lights shone on the stone and snow-covered paths, and villagers helped each other ensure the safety of the roads. Stables and animal shelters were protected from the weight of the snow, supported by hay and straw. Young people guided each other while fishing and carrying wood, and children safely learned the intricacies of the work and took on responsibilities within the community. Ice-covered rivers, frozen lakes, and snow-covered mountain roads required constant effort from the villagers to survive and maintain their community spirit. The harsh conditions of winter, while increasing physical strength, also strengthened community bonds, offering viewers both a historical atmosphere and a peaceful setting. Years ago, in the villages of Europe, Snow and ice were not just cold, but a part of life. From the Bavarian mountains to Balkan villages, from the frozen waters of the Baltic to the harsh winds of northern Norway, villagers supported each other to survive. Every carry of firewood, every lighting of a stove, every catch of fish was a silent ritual that strengthened community bonds as much as it was a personal struggle. Children learned about life while playing in the snow, young people took on responsibility, and the elderly shared their knowledge. Every village, every house, every street was filled with small but significant struggles against the hardships of winter. These silent but intense winter days have shown people throughout history not only hardship, but also solidarity and hope. Now, as a viewer, you are preparing for a peaceful sleep as you explore the past on this journey. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and relax in the silence of Europe's old villages. If you've watched this far, you can support us by subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any new historical stories, and we hope you always return to this peaceful world. Sweet dreams.